Welcome to season four, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I hope that each and every one of you in the audience enjoyed Christmas and New Year's celebrations with family and friends, and that this week episodes find you all doing well. It is a new year, but not a new beginning here for the podcast. On this program, we will continue to highlight how our government at the local, state, and national levels are working hard at usurping the liberty of the people. Also, we will compare and contrast two very distinct styles of leadership on the show: the selfish and corrupt style of leadership that is so pervasive in our government today, against the much needed servant leadership that could put our constitutional republic back on the proper track. A large part of the show is exposing the lies that are told by our government. Yes, the government that hates us. The lies told by our government that serve to keep them in positions of power and influence. In this week's episode, I discuss the upcoming March school board primary in Sevier County. It seems for the first time in a long time, there is a three-way race for the seat that represents the fourth school board district here. We'll also talk about something that seems to be on everybody's tongue lately: the Epstein client list. Is it truth, fiction, or something in between? I'll also discuss a recent article that came out in the Wall Street Journal that touches on the lies sold to the public and to members of the armed forces about domestic extremism in the ranks. Lies purposely told in order to build that military we talked about a couple of weeks ago. One that would have no qualms with arresting or firing upon the citizens of this great republic. It serves as just one of the many of this administration's attempts to usurp the liberty of the people. I'll also be touching a little bit about my campaign to represent Tennessee's House District 12. Very little movement in that area for the moment, but I'm sure things will be heating up pretty soon. We'll open up the first segment with an update on my schedule, personal schedule only, though, nothing that impacts the podcast. The past week was completely full for me. All the Christmas decorations had to come down and be put away, as well as the large amount of prep work conducted for the new contract that's about to be executed. In fact, I'm on the contract right now down in Midland, Texas. In addition to all that, I had to spend a full day last Saturday at the second annual East Tennessee Grassroots Leadership Summit. I will summarize a lot of what happened, what was discussed at that event in next week's show when the topic of leadership comes up in the rotation. Needless to say, the past week was jam-packed with activities that left little time for show prep. Of course, I've been following the news, though, both local and national. But for now, let's get on with this week's show and the opening of season 4 of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to a show where we will discuss how the citizens of this republic must continuously fight to maintain our liberty, and those fights are increasingly against our own government. Some of the episodes on liberty will shine a light on exactly how all levels of government are seeking to erode our constitutionally protected rights. We will also discuss the leadership needed to restore our constitutional republic, as well as providing examples of good and bad people in leadership positions in all facets of our society. Additionally, we will discuss the lies the people in positions of power and influence spread every day so they can maintain those same positions. I'm your host, Larry Linden, retired U.S. Navy veteran, small business owner, and candidate for the Tennessee House of Representatives, and this is the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. All right, folks, we'll kick off this segment with a bit of an update on what's been going on in the Linton household, as well as a brief update on the upcoming work schedule. When we were last together, I was wrapping things up on my final 2023 field engagements down in New Mexico. I completed my last coaching assignment there in Carlsbad and began to travel home on the date of my wedding anniversary. Originally, I was scheduled to return home by midday that day, but as air travel for me usually goes, several problems were encountered. First, my very early flight out of Midland, Texas, ended up being delayed, on the tarmac no less, and for a couple of hours. It wasn't supposed to be that long, but I guess that is what happens when the airline doesn't schedule a mechanic to be on duty when there is an early morning scheduled flight. It seems that the airline suffered from what I like to call PDD, or planning deficit disorder. Of course, I'm a big fan of finding a problem with an airplane while it's sitting on the ground instead of in the air, But the lack of foresight in having a mechanic on location for a scheduled departure put several travelers, myself included, in danger of missing their connecting flights in Dallas. You see, when I book my travel, which in any time it includes a layover anywhere, I try to arrange for at least a 2 hour layover, just in case something like this happens. And in this case, the amount of time the first leg of the flight was delayed leaving Midland turned out to be the exact amount of time that I had originally planned for my layover. That wasn't the kicker in this whole deal, though, as I'll explain. The pilot did manage to make up some time in the air from Midland to Texas, and the first flight landed at the exact time that boarding for my next flight began. But it just so happened that the first flight arrived in Terminal B at Dallas Fort Worth, and my connecting flight was departing from Terminal E. Those two terminals are the furthest apart from each other at DFW. So I had to run to catch the tram from Terminal B to Terminal E, and then I had to ran from the tram to my gate. It took about 14 minutes. When I arrived at the gate, the airline agents there were checking in the final 3 people that were standing in line, and I got in line right behind them. Those 3 passengers then scanned their tickets and proceeded to enter the jetway. When I moved to scan my boarding pass, the ticket agent placed her hand over the scanner and told me that I was too late, that they had already closed the flight. Keep in mind, I arrived at the gate and stood in line 16 minutes prior to departure. But by the time the 3 people in front of me had their tickets printed and scanned, a full 2 minutes had passed. Apparently, it doesn't matter if you were standing there in line. If you have not scanned your boarding pass 15 minutes prior to departure, they close the flight. You can all probably guess how angry that made me. Speculation can sometimes get a person into trouble, but there are times when you find yourself in circumstances that cause you to speculate on the reason some things happen. Well, and some things did here, and it just didn't make sense. Well, this was definitely one of those occasions, so I started to speculate. It didn't make sense to me that I followed the rules and arrived at the gate 16 minutes prior to departure and wasn't allowed to board. It also didn't make sense to me that my delay in getting to the departure gate, which was caused by the airline itself and through no fault of my own, was not even taken into consideration. The gate agent's attitude towards me did not make sense either. When I had pointed all these things out to her, she was very snotty and completely unprofessional in the way she responded to my questions. And of course, that was before I got angry. That led to my speculation. You see, I did not look like anything like the 3 passengers I was in line behind, nor did I look anything like the gate agent that had the attitude. I may or may not be correct in my speculation, but with what is going on in our republic right now, it's an option that I have to seriously consider. Of course, there is or was nothing I could do about it other than take my concerns up with management of the airline. But it did not change the fact that I was stuck at DFW for another 8 hours waiting to catch the next flight home, which of course I did. I got home on my anniversary, but just in time to tuck my wife into bed for the night. Since that happened, though, you can rest assured I will keep my eyes and ears open and pay closer attention to my dealings with customer service representatives that change my speculation to the actual facts. After the flight fiasco, though, I was home in time to spend Christmas and New Year's with my bride. We had our family's traditional Christmas dinner, which is ham and spaghetti with our daughter and son-in-law, as well as Denise's brother. Now, you all may laugh or think it's weird that spaghetti is a traditional meal on Christmas, but once you have tasted Denise spaghetti sauce, you wouldn't be laughing anymore. You would be asking, when will Denise be making her sauce again, and try to snag yourself an invitation to dinner at our house. Her sauce is just that amazing, folks. Anyway, it was a nice, relaxing Christmas day that followed a great Christmas Eve service at our church. After that, my kids and the brother-in-law departed the pattern, Denise and I settled in for a day of just enjoying each other's company and reflecting on the past year. We found out then that I totaled over 160 plus nights working out of state for my consulting gigs. So that really led to the euphoria of being home for the holidays. New Year's Eve and New Year's Day were just as uneventful and relaxing. I was worried that Harlow would be unable to sleep because of the fireworks at midnight, but they weren't as bad this year as they were in years past. But as I mentioned in the introduction, it's a new year. But with the same mission for the podcast. So that's the update for the past 3 weeks. And I'm going to take a quick break here before we kick off the next segment. So with that, I'll be right back. All right, folks. The first thing I would like to discuss is some national news before I get into some local stuff. Let's talk about something that appears to be a huge news item. Well, it's just one of many of the huge items out there, but it seems to be the one that has garnered a lot of attention. Yep, I'm referring to the Epstein list. There's been a lot of buzz about that, at least from one side of the political spectrum. The communists, on the other hand, they're doing their best to ignore it or to poo poo it as if the list of names is meaningless. Or we cannot let slide the fact that some of the so-called middle of the road news outlets, along with the commie outlets, they like to emphasize the fact that 2 former presidents are mentioned in the list of names associated with that pedophile. But we'll save that for another show. What I would like to discuss about that list is something a bit different, and very few people have picked up on this. It is the aspect of how this list ties into the erosion of our liberty. There are some very powerful people on that list and in those depositions, which should not come as a big surprise, or in fact, it doesn't come as a big surprise to many of us. It confirms what we have known for some time now, and that is the fact that the people on the list and in those court documents often sit at the top of the political, entertainment, and judicial food chains. It has been obvious to most people capable of critical thinking that these so-called leaders in their respective social stratums there really is no other way to put this. They're evil, evil and depraved. Heck, Bill Clinton did not earn the moniker Slick Willie by being the paragon of virtue, if you know what I mean. After all, anyone with a brain and functioning eyesight knew about Bill Clinton's proclivities since before the blue dress scandal. From female students at Yale and the University of Arkansas, among other anonymous accusations, comes the valid charges from ladies like Juanita Broaddrick, Carolyn Moffett, Paula Jones, Kathleen Willey, and many, many others. Of course, there's the infamous Monica Lewinsky. We could go on and on. But as the commies often say when they are attacking their political opponents, where there is smoke, there's fire. Bill Clinton and many other people that are at the top of their hierarchical organizations are rarely held accountable. Sure, some are, and I believe that plays along with what I'm thinking when I say this Epstein information ties into the erosion of the people's liberty. These people's behavior is widely known within their elite circles, and only a few of them pay the price when their depravity becomes widely publicized. The people must be thrown a bone for those very few examples, like Hollywood producer, Democrat donor Harvey Weinstein, or comedian and Democrat activist Louis C.K. Or how about comedian and Democrat donor Andy Dick? There's also comedian and former Democrat Senator Al Franken. Notice the trend of comedians there. Anyway, that is just a method. I think these comedians or people, these comedians, they use their comedic effect to put their victims at ease, pretending to joke around with them before the assault begins, so that when they're confronted about their behavior, they can claim it was all just a joke. Or how about Democratic politicians like former Representative Anthony Weiner and former New York State Governor Eliot Spitzer? These people had to be the evil communists' sacrificial lambs, so to speak. They had to be sacrificed to the majority of the population that finds their behavior like that abhorrent. So they can demonstrate, these commies, quite falsely, but I believe and they're believed by a lot of people, that these commies are the good guys by putting these people up. But people at the top of the pyramid, they aren't held accountable. Bill Clinton's behavior is often much worse than the few commies that are sacrificed on the altar of maintaining the we're good guys facade, while the big fish are allowed to roam free. But think about this, ladies and gentlemen. How long have you known about Bill Clinton's behavior? Since the early part of his presidency in the 1990s, right? Going on 20 plus years now, and suddenly his name is on this list and he's mentioned in numerous documents, and we're all supposed to cheer, shout, great, we're finally going to get him. Really? Finally going to get him? We're not finally getting a thing other than the fact that the people that have been in possession of these lists and documents what they want to give us. Nothing more, nothing less. The Clintons, I believe, have outlived their usefulness to the new aristocracy and the powers that be. And they want to give all of us normies some red meat to chew on. But notice something I just said. People have been in possession of these lists and documents, probably along with all the video evidence and tape depositions, for a very long time now. Just how much evidence was gathered from Epstein's New York mansion shortly after he was arrested in 2019? Where are those videos that he used, I believe, to protect himself during his decades of abusing and trafficking young girls? Now, follow me here. Epstein, he first faced criminal charges for his activities back in 2006. He got a sweetheart deal back then that allowed him to continue to engage in his sex trafficking scheme all the way through until 2019. For 13 years, well, in fact, he was accused in March 2005 for molesting a 15-year-old girl in his Florida mansion. The sweetheart deal that he got resulted in a grand jury only indicting him on a single count of soliciting prostitution. Of course, all of that led to some more investigations and dealings that resulted in only pleading guilty to 2 state-level charges and escaping federal charges. That was back in 2007 and 2008. So for more than a decade, the federal government was in possession of evidence of this guy's evil and criminal activities, but waited until the loud clamoring of the masses in 2019 to finally arrest him on federal charges. Then his New York City mansion was raided and all sorts of evidence removed, meaning it was no longer in Epstein's possession and therefore could not be used by him to, quote unquote, protect himself in some kind of blackmail scheme. And then he suddenly hangs himself. How convenient, right? For more than 4 years now, the federal government has been in possession of everything they grabbed from his mansion, and there has not been one person charged or one arrest made against anybody on the list that was recently released. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Why? I believe it's because the deep state, or the cabal, the new aristocracy, the ruling elite, or whatever you choose to call them, have started using what they seized from Epstein's control to do something similar. Epstein may have been using it to protect himself or whatever, but now the cabal, they are using it to not only protect themselves, but to also blackmail their way into solidifying their power and control. Didn't the FBI just finagle their way into getting a brand new $3.5 billion headquarters building in Maryland? At a time when the FBI is wildly unpopular, the usurpers in Washington, D.C. have decided to not only fund their operations, but to fund a brand new headquarters for them. It's almost as if they have a lot of members of Congress on video participating in the sex trafficking of little girls. The cabal in DC has only allowed the most recent release of this Epstein information to accomplish a couple of things, in my opinion. First, and as usual, it serves as a distraction. It forces their useful idiot enablers to go on the defensive about their preferred people in power that are on this list. And for the most part, the people on the right are crowing, "See, told you so," about those very same lefty preferred people. Secondly, the cabal is also using this information release to shed some liabilities, like the Clintons, while solidifying their hold on other people in positions of power and influence across the various industries of government, entertainment, and news media. There will be no correcting this situation, ladies and gentlemen, until every one of those people are removed from their positions. I've got more on this, but it's time to take a break. So I'll be right back after this brief pause. And we're back for just a bit more about the Epstein stuff before we move on. And it ties back into what I believe are the two reasons for the cabal releasing or allowing to be released what we've seen so far. They are shedding the useful idiots that no longer need to advance their agenda, like Bill Clinton and other high-profile lefties. They are also using the release to demonstrate they are capable of releasing this information So it sends a message to those people that are not named, but they're on the Epstein's list. It sends them a very specific message, and it's to keep them continuing to toe the line to keep the deep state in power. Now, why do I believe all that? Well, it goes back to their seizure of all that evidence in Epstein's house in 2019. They have the names, they have the videos, they have the dates and locations where all of this happened, yet no arrests. However, and they being the FBI, they have arrested grandmothers in their 70s and 80s for daring to accept a Capitol police officer's invitation to walk through the Capitol building on January the 6th. They have spent time and money gathering the geo-tracking location information for every American that was in our nation's capital that day. They have solicited and gathered, without a warrant, the bank records and cell phone records and messages for people in the Capitol that day. They have the information about the vehicle that was driven by the person who placed the inoperable pipe bombs next to the RNC and DNC headquarters that day as well. Zero arrests of actual criminals, of sex traffickers, of terrorists, yet people that demonstrate that they will protest against rigged elections and corrupt law enforcement, they're arrested and held without bail for years in DC prisons. That is how I know the deep state, or the cabal, that has this evidence is not using it to bring child rapists and sex traffickers to justice, but they're using it to solidify their positions of power and control. Pay attention to how this unfolds, but do not waste any time or energy thinking this is some sort of victory, at least a victory for our side. It is a cabal victory only. So now let's go on to some local stuff here in Sevier County. As I mentioned earlier, I will break down the East Tennessee Grassroots Leadership Summit that took place in Sevierville on Saturday afternoon, the 6th. I'll pass along some of the information to you from the notes I took while I was there. Of course, the speakers had a lot of great info to pass along to those in attendance, and I want to especially thank Kelly O'Connor and the rest of the leadership team of Empowered Sevier for putting on the summit again this year. If you live in Sevier County, you can find Empowered Sevier on Facebook and start the process of joining this group. I was humbled and honored that these great patriots asked me to kick things off with a Pledge of Allegiance at the start of the program. It's groups like these that people seeking a return to actual normalcy in our state and in our republic that everybody in the audience needs to seek out and become active in. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction to this week's episode, it seems that there's a three-way race for one of the seats on the Sevier County Board of Education. Something like that has not happened here in a long time. In fact, it's quite rare for there to be anybody running for one of those positions against an incumbent. There are two seats up for consideration in the March primary, but only one of them is being contested. The incumbent, he is Mr. Charles Temple. Quite sure you are all aware of exactly how I feel about every member of the Sevier County Board of Education. If you're a new listener, I encourage you to go back and listen to the episodes where I talk about these corrupt or incompetent elected officials. In fact, there's a video out there of me addressing them on one occasion about their failure to follow their oaths, as well as not fulfilling the duties and responsibilities of their positions as stated in their bylaws. In fact, I'm sure that the longtime listeners of this program know exactly where I stand on the issue of publication in not only our state, but also in our nation. Or you can see how I respond to the communist that's running as the Democrat candidate to replace Senator Marsha Blackburn. She is one of the Tennessee Three that made a name for themselves during last year's regular session of the General Assembly. She's a diehard communist that supports the alphabet mafia's indoctrination of children in public schools, and she is doing her best at campaigning to ensure that the mental illness so prevalent in today's government indoctrination centers continues unabated. So anyway, the incumbent running for re-election is Charles Temple. Two other individuals have thrown their hat in the ring to replace Mr. Temple, and they are Mr. Matt Ballard and a Mr. Charles Ogle. People that live here in Sevier County know that Ogle is a pretty prominent name in the county, and it could possibly carry some weight at the voting booth. As a matter of fact, the same thing goes for the other declared candidate in the race that I'm in. We'll talk about my future opponent at length in future episodes and stick with this current race today. As soon as I found out about this school board seat being contested, I reached out to Mr. Ballard and Mr. Ogle through Facebook. Initially, they were interested in talking to me about their campaign because I did only contact them through my personal Facebook page. When they said they were willing to answer some questions, I followed up with an invitation to come on the show here and conduct an interview of sorts. It was crickets for a while from Mr. Ogle, and then a response telling me he would think about it. However, Mr. Ballard, he flat out denied the request to come on the show and to tell the audience the whys and what's about his campaign. I'm not sure of the why behind his refusal, but this appears to be another one of those situations where I can speculate. You see, Mr. Ballard has a bit of an issue with abusing a position of trust within the government. It was reported early last year that Mr. Ballard, who was the longtime president of the Sevier County Utility District, or SCUD, he was removed from that position after the Board of Commissioners said that he used district resources and employees at his own home and at the home of a relative. He was officially terminated on the 22nd of March last year. For a bit of interesting trivia, news reports at the time of his ouster state that he was once the assistant mayor before he started working at SCUD. I don't know, assistant mayor of what, Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, or Sevierville, but is that the position where in the government where Mr. Ballard learned how to abuse power? News reports also stated at the time that a state comptroller's investigation would be conducted, but I can't find anything about that during just a cursory search. But rest assured, I will keep on this. Also, it would appear that Mr. Ogle and Mr. Ballard have some inconsistent voting patterns that I would like to ask them about. It would appear, though, that both of them are unwilling to talk to me, so I'll have to get somebody else to ask them these questions. So that's it for the local stuff. I'm going to take a quick break before I come back for closing out the show with some of God's word and some more information that ties into today's episode. And so we'll be right back. Well, folks, that's it for this week. Thank you once again for joining me as we kicked off season 4 of this podcast. It's hard to believe that I'm getting into my 4th year of doing this show. It is a labor of love, I guess. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to save our republic. Right now, I believe our republic is on life support and is fading. The attacks on President Trump through the judicial system, the cabal controlling the information and client list of the world's most prolific pedophile to maintain their grip on power, the rigging of elections locally and nationally, the wrong people running for election or re-election. That's why I titled this week's episode, Fighting the Good Fight. Because that's what we are needed to do, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we're in. We're in a fight for the heart and soul of our constitutional republic. That brings to mind something I read in the newest devotional my bride got me for Christmas. The title of the devotional is Be Strong and Steadfast, 366 Devotions for Men. She knows me so well, doesn't she? It will take each and every one of us to be strong and steadfast in this good fight. But one of the daily devotionals I read last week touched on a topic that I regularly discuss on the show. I believe it's the driving force behind the downfall of our republic. And that force is apathy. The devotional states, and I'm quoting here, apathy can cause you to lose what you most value. If you are apathetic toward your spouse, you are in danger of losing her. If you are apathetic about investing your money, you're in danger of losing your retirement income. If you are apathetic toward God, you are in danger of losing the priceless rewards that await his followers in heaven. Apathy often seems to be a passive force that simply lulls you to sleep, but it can be an aggressive force that prevents you from keeping what is most meaningful and important. Unquote. Now, that's not only true about our faith and our relationship with God, but how true is that about our country? Voter or electorate apathy has lured or lulled a vast number of citizens of this republic into a sleep. And it's allowed the government to turn into this corrupt machine that will eventually keep us from what is meaningful and important. our liberty. Our freedom is at stake, and it will require a fight from the citizens to regain what has been lost and a fight to put more restrictions on government overreach into place. It is most assuredly a fight worth undertaking, folks. I didn't leave myself enough time to get into the now debunked lie about extremism in the armed forces. I'll save that for a show where we focus on the lies that deep state keeps spreading in a couple of weeks here. But for now, we will close this week's show with wisdom from God's word. And it comes to us from Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. I encourage you all to remain strong and steadfast. Join me in this good fight to restore our state and our nation to its founding principles, the primary of which is the liberty of the individual. Until next week, I humbly pray and ask that you stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.